Donc je voulais simplement, c'était un des thèmes un peu du festival, c'est savoir un peu d'abord, if you were so keen to do this festival, is because I think you have to fight that not to give the possibility to the spectators in these moments to come and see concerts and to come and see cinema, where even mostly of Europe, it's almost impossible to see it now. And I'd like to ask you, and I can start with Bruno, what you think that do you think that after all this time, this concert, all this pandemia and all these things, the reaction and what you can say, the concerts will come back exactly with the same strength? You think the music, for the artists, for the relation with the audience will stay the same, or something will change?
Well, I hardly understood your question. I think the lady is missing here, don't you think?
Yeah, first of all, yes.
But you were talking about the opening up of...
Non, après la pandémie,
No. Well,
vrai que l'acoustique est après diabolique, tu vois, mais...
I have no really clear view about what's going to happen, except that it all is going to depend whether the whole thing is going to last or not. You know, if it's going to be over in a few weeks, I suppose that there is a great likelihood that we might just come back to what we've known before. If that is supposed to go on, and it depends on the reaction of different people. You know, I know, for instance, that Piotr has had great satisfaction, as I have had, in that kind of quarantine, which was great. I know that some people to whom I was very close, somebody like Glenn Gould, would have been up in seventh heaven, you know, with that. So that did he have an influence on the concert activity or not? Will the pandemia have any kind of influence on the concert activity? I'm not sure. It might require some new perspectives, new imagination, but that has happened already. And particularly with somebody like Piotr, I don't know whether the audience are aware about what he did do in the last few years. There was one, first of all, he disappeared from the stage for quite a while, twice already, and then he, just before the first sabbatical year that he took, he played, that was on the 8th of December, I remember very clearly, in the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées in Paris. That was your last concert before the sabbatical, and he already invented some new ways of presenting music, in the sense that before the concert started, he was on the stage already. He'd been on the stage for about half an hour, dressed with an overcoat, gloves, cap, and he had a pot of tea with him, and he was reading either the papers or a novel or maybe a score, and waiting for 8 o'clock to strike. And at 8 o'clock sharp, he left, he undressed, took off his coat and went to the piano and played as if he was playing for the gathering of some friends that he had invited to
I think the first time he made that was here in Cascais. Here in Cascais in some years ago. It was the first time he made.
10 years ago.
10 years ago.
Was it?
Yeah, he started like this. Here is a place for new experience for Piotr, I think. And I know Piotr, it's different from mostly of the artist that plays in concerts, because sometimes he likes to stop, and I think he's very happy now that there is some concerts where really he doesn't have to do some of the concerts that were qui étaient prévus, donc tu es content parce qu'il y a quelques concerts qui ont été annulés parce qu'il y a un rapport comment dire avec le stage qui qui est pas simple, je pense. Et donc, quand il y a quelques concerts qui sont annulés, ça te détend. Mais en même temps, c'est quelque chose que tu as toujours besoin, même intérieurement, de continuer. Même il y a quelque chose pour toi que c'est important de continuer à que ça existe. Est-ce que tu sens au jour d'aujourd'hui une angoisse pour ce vide qui existe un peu part du monde au niveau des concerts qui ont été annulés?
Écoute, on continue en français alors. Non, je sens absolument aucune angoisse par rapport à ça. Vraiment, j'ai d'autres angoisses d'une autre nature, mais je suis plutôt content. Là, je devais être à Munich aujourd'hui. Tu te souviens quand on a parlé de ma venue ici au festival, je devais partir lundi soir, hier soir en fait, pour être à Munich. Donc Munich s'est annulé, les concerts, tout est annulé, je pense, au moins jusqu'à la fin de l'année, mais je pense probablement jusqu'à Pâques. Et non, c'était un moment de recueillement. Et moi, je sens que c'est un moment aussi de... Ça sonne un petit peu, peut-être pathétique ce que je veux dire, mais c'est un moment de vérité aussi. Je trouve que c'est un moment qui révèle des choses en nous et qui révèle peut-être des couches plus profondes en nous. Et moi, je trouve ça formidable, vraiment, d'avoir cette chance. C'est vraiment une chance, je vois ça comme une chance. Alors, je réalise qu'il y a des personnes, il y a notamment des musiciens plus jeunes qui commencent, qui ne serait-ce que pour des raisons financières, c'est très difficile. Hein. Donc ça, je les plains et ça doit être horrible, vraiment. Mais moi, je vois ça comme une grande chance aussi pour tout ce qu'on appelle le business musical. Peut-être de réfléchir, de faire les choses différemment, de faire moins, d'aller à l'essentiel. Tout ça allait à un tel tempo, avec des prévisions tellement à l'avance. Tout ça devenait tellement une machine à faire des concerts. Moi, c'est vrai que les dernières années, je trouvais ça de plus en plus difficile. Quand on vous demande un programme dans 2 ans, dans 3 ans, on essaye de construire un calendrier tellement à l'avance. D'un côté, c'est sécurisant parce qu'on sait qu'on se projette dans le futur, 1 an, 2 ans, 3 ans à l'avance, mais de plus en plus, moi je sens, c'est comme on est dans un carcan, oui, c'est dit, oui, qui vous broie de plus en plus. Et je trouve que c'est un moment où on peut enfin respirer et réfléchir. Qu'est-ce qu'on veut pas, voir des amis, pas juste perform, comme on dit. Ouais. Aussi dans la vie.
Et moi, je pense que, like you told us, that for the artists that's starting, it will be, not more difficult for them to try to show themselves how to exist and how to their work. And I would like to speak with Martim, that is another generation, how we see all this period, how we see if something will change or not, what you think about all this, and for new composers that they cannot show what they are doing and all these things, what you think about?
I'm sorry, are you a musician?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yes, я дирижер. Я дирижер.
Uh-huh.
I think that it is, first of all, too early to call. But the thing I'm most afraid of in regards the youngest generation is having the whole ecosystem cut short, which means young musicians not having the chance to present their work now or in the next 2 years, meaning that they will not ever have the chance to succeed, because music has this perverse side of it that's very akin to athletics, for example, where you have to peak until a certain age. And if you don't grasp certain opportunities before the age of 30 or 35, you probably miss the train already. So as someone who's in his late 20s, I feel that, because from my own perspective, having had concerts that were canceled and postponed for maybe 4, 5 years from now, I can't be sure that I'm going to be around still. And the same happens with other artists. So the thing I'm most afraid of is really if we have 2 years that cause such a disruption in programming that it affects the next 10 years of concerts with us having to reschedule and send things up front, a whole new generation will come in the meantime, and this one will be left out for hanging, you know? And that's the thing I'm most concerned about. I don't think nothing really amazing will come out of this because the live stream format is obviously a solution for a problem. It's not something we want as plan A. It's maybe a good complement for concerts and to have a little backstage information and insights, but I don't think it's going to replace anything. I hope that this will be over soon and we will resume our normal life, and so it won't have affected audience behavior or the public understanding of what we do on stage. I'm just really afraid about young musicians, if that's what you asked me.
And Bruno, in your relation, in your work, you know, that you have in the relation with, for example, with the finances like Mezzo or Arte or something like that, do you still that something would change, or you can, if you have a good project, you think that you still can, for example, to do a new film with Piotr or with anyone that you admire and you want to do? What do you think the things how are now for the moment, not only because of the pandemic, with about generally.
Well, I don't know, because I believe that my present ambition would be rather to have my past work being made available. That's my main ambition today. And it can be in the form of books, which have been the case recently, films. Concerts are more or less impossible now because of a disease which I have had for two years. Although, you know, I need still to practice and to be active with the instrument. I find it absolutely essential, you know, literally essential. But it's totally different question, I think, from theirs, because there's something almost, how shall I say, you know, which is more than an essential. It is a way of living that remains for me the same. But my own work implies even more solitude than yours, doesn't it? You know, it's a solitary kind of work. You know, I think the whole thing is dropping off. It's a completely solitary activity, whether one writes a book or prepares a film. The actual filming takes very little time. You know, post-production is much more important. The writing of a film beforehand is something absolutely essential. Now, it has to do also with music, you know, because I make films about music, so that I have to go very deeply into each work that might be the object of my purpose. But it's very different type. I don't think it has been affected at all by the present circumstances, at all. You know, and except for the fact that I've been able to spend much more time at home without being disturbed by any visitors, by any kind of overeating, by any kind of, you know, all these things are gone, and I found it absolutely fantastic. Very, very productive, actually very productive. And we were talking together about, just a few minutes ago, about the fact that hello, yes, that we can speak Russian together, you know, and the last book that I made, which has just been issued in Moscow, and which came out in France earlier this year, I first wrote in Russian, and then translated into French, which was a great experience, you know, because it's what you would call auto-traduction, you know, self-translation. It was a great experience for which I really needed to be alone, you know, and it was great fun, you know. Anyway, so I'm sorry, I'm talking just endlessly.
But there is something that, for example, I think, and Martin, that we can talk about, because how can, you know, the musicians of an orchestra pratiquer? How can they practice? Yes, how they can't. No, to you. They cannot make any practice, anything. You know, they can't to stay at home and if they will lose something, they will need much more time afterwards, you know, and everything.
You mean conductors in general?
Conductors and orchestras and everyone.
Well,
you know.
Conducting, fortunately, is not a physical activity. It's more of an intellectual endeavor that is expressed through your movements, but also through your verbal expression and through your intentions and etc. So I can be just as prepared as I was before, because everything I need is time alone, just like Bruno and like Piotr, to be alone with the music, you know. And fortunately, I don't need to exercise flicking the baton. That's very easy. In 2 hours, everyone can learn how to give an upbeat on Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. It's very easy. It is hard, though, to lose the contact with other human beings. And that applies not just to conductors, I think, but we were all on the verge of autism at some point, around maybe late April, beginning of May. And that was kind of scary. And I realized that suddenly everyone was calling each other more and spending more time on the phone. I hate being on the phone myself, and I found myself making regular phone calls because that was a way to reach out and be together with other people. And I think I'm not losing anything as a conductor from staying more time at home, but maybe as a musician I am, because I'm not in contact with people. I was missing moments like these, you know, where you can be in the room listening to a piano recital, you know, and I was deeply moved, and I'm sure everyone was moved. It's as if what happened here now has twice as the effect as it had, because we are so craving this. We are so dry. It's like a brook that once had a big, big river. It's now completely dry, so every drop of water really counts. And I feel that we were starving culturally a few moments ago, and thank God things opened up a little and some rain started to pour, but it's still way too little for what we need, I think.
You feel the same, Bruno.
Yeah, quite,
you don't understand?
I find his, you know, of course, I find his remarks very, very relevant to the whole ambiance of today. And the fact that he, you know, his profession, active profession, is that of a mainly intellectual nature, except that there is a lot of communication, and because the way of transmitting one's thoughts to, whether by gesture or words, or not even just direct communication of thoughts to a body of musicians and to a body of audience, is something which is very specific and which requires a lot of an enormous amount of time, you know, looking at the score and perusing a score of music and having a complete synthetic view of the whole thing, which requires that kind of totally solitary also communication with the score or with the composer. So it's something which, as soon as we manage to distantiate ourselves from the physical act of doing anything, I think it's wonderful. It's only in sports that this cannot be done, no, obviously. But for all other activities, it should be emphasized to a maximum. And I think that Piotr has got more or less the same view. I mean, you spend certainly much more time with a musical score, you know, reading it or studying it than at the piano.
Actually, I don't know. Should I talk here? Here? Bruno, not really. I must contradict you here, because more and more with age, I realize how that an interpretation, I'm speaking of myself, of course, it's very personal, it's not made out of analysis and thought, and it's a confrontation of the analysis and the sound you produce, and how do you make them more or less match? And there is no other way for me than spend time at the piano. This I discovered. It's a very unfortunate situation because I don't like practicing, really. It's a curse for me. But for me, there is no other way than, whatever I would like to hear, whatever I've analyzed in music, whatever my, concept of the piece is one thing. Then what do I actually hear? And it's incredibly frustrating most of the time what I hear, and so I just try to get closer to what I would like to hear, but there is no way of getting closer than repeating, and repeating. And actually, as I spoke recently to a friend, it's not about defining what you want, it's about defining what you don't want, How can you know what you want in music? I have no idea what I want in music. I know what I don't want, which is most of things, yeah? And it's just, you try, I don't want. And then after weeks, maybe months, okay, maybe there was something there, for a moment. And so in my case, I do need to spend time physically with the instrument.
With that, the activity of a sculptor, who does away with most of the marble and ends up with a very small percentage of what is
yes. Of course, I mean, if I were to sum up, I don't know, let's take a Bach fugue. One of the fugues I've played today, let's say, which lasts maybe 3 minutes. The second fugue is longer, maybe 5 minutes. So these 5 minutes of music, when I think of how much time I've spent on it, it's just not, it's totally out of proportion when you think of it. It's, I cannot count, I could never count the time I spent with this music,
Do you think you spent more time studying these works than Bach used to compose them?
There is no doubt about this. There's absolutely no doubt. Bach wrote very quickly. He hardly corrected anything. And it was much easier for him to write this than for me to play. There is no comparison. It's quite scary, this thought, actually. I don't know how do you
well, I thought, Bruno, you were going to go one way, and then I thought you were going to counter that. But I recall Glenn Gould saying something on camera. I can't remember if it was with you or any other environment on camera he was at, but he was saying that one of the reasons why he was so paranoid about the concert experience was that when you walk on stage, if you don't know what you're going to do, you're dead, right? Because you're here to deliver a product. We don't care as an audience how many hours you spent working a trill or an ornament, starting with upper note, lower note. We don't need to know that. We need the product. And he said that as an artist, he had so many ideas, etc., that he could not decide. So therefore, he needed to go to the studio and try them all out like a buffet, and then choose, I'm going to have salads with eggs, with this, with that, and make his own thing. And the thing I want to come to is he had a lot of time. He retired, etc. We all know the story. So he had an intimate relationship with the music, and that was surrounded with time. And I'm thinking of Carlos Kleiber, who was a great conductor. I don't know if people know about Carlos Kleiber. He was mostly an opera conductor, but he was considered the greatest conductor of all times in a stupid survey in a magazine. But the fun thing is that he only did 92 concerts in his entire life. 92 is less than Valery Gergiev does in 1 year. So that's his entire life. And he had so much time. He wouldn't mind spending 2 years without doing a concert. And when he felt he was ready, or when his fridge was empty, as Karen said, he would conduct a concert. And I think that maybe now we are all a little forced to be like Carlos Kleiber, and a little like Glenn Gould also, and all those artists who spend intimate time in the presence of the score and have to make decisions, because we are not hard-pressed to go on stage and deliver, because there's no stage, there's no concerts. So we can prepare for that concert we had in March. We can still be preparing that concert for when the day it comes, maybe next year, maybe in 2 years. And I'm sure that we are all enriched by this, because the more time you spend with it, the deeper you go, the more illuminated you are, or maybe not, but that's also good. And maybe that's one good thing I forgot to say about this, is that before the pandemic, we were all stressed, and the thing we had the least was time. And now, we're maybe a little poorer in money, but we are millionaires in time. We never had so much time on our hands. So if we put it to a good use, maybe some really good artistic things will come out of it. I don't know what you think.
Well, the only thing I would say is, when I think of a concert in March or April, which didn't happen, and me working on it, there is no way I would work on a concert that didn't happen. I would only work on a concert that happens, you know, and if the concert doesn't happen, I'd rather do something else. I say it really honestly. It's, but that's, again, very personal. But, and I'm not, you know, those mechanisms of preparing a piece with the perspective of playing it on a concert, you know, it's so complicated. The deadline factor, you know, that you've got 3 weeks left, you've got 6, you've got 2 days left. You know, yesterday I was playing for myself. I said, okay, I've got 1 day left. I have 1 day left, you know. So what I'm going to, so if there's not 1 day, but let's say 1 year, well, it's just, I'll be either not working at all or working on something else or working differently. It's completely different. And Kleiber, if we think, I mean, was an incredibly complicated person, and he hated conducting, at least this is what he was saying, you know, and yet you see this orgasm on his face when he conducts, you know, so it's all full of contradictions, but in fact, yes, he wanted his Audi or his Maserati, and then he decided he would conduct in Tenerife, you know. This was the apparent reason, but obviously it was not, you know, it was not the only reason, certainly. There was something much, much, much deeper. But what I just want to say that the stimulation to play, the stimulation to practice, the stimulation to play concerts, those stimulations are so complex and contradictory often. And one of the challenge I think we face now is this is how I feel, is we actually, without concerts, we just, okay, do I practice, don't I practice? Do I practice for which reason? Do I practice for in 1 year, in 6 months? How do I continue? And it's a moment to reflect on those contradictions maybe, you know? The ambition which we all have, the ego, the real desire to make music, the state of my bank accounts, everything, you know, comes into the picture.
Don't you think, Piotr, also that you have that extraordinarily masochist way of treating yourself? Yes, oh yes. Well, you know, for instance, I remember when you started exploring the world of Szymanowski, and you showed to me the third sonata, and I was literally horrified when I saw the score. It was the first time I was looking at the score, and I really thought, I mean, the man who wants to learn this is mad. I mean, is literally mad. And I know that you shut yourself up for quite a while, you know, and it was something which involved some kind of a torture for you, wasn't it? Or was it very simple? You know?
No, it was absolute torture. I mean, for me, practicing is torture because I'm very lazy. So it's very simple. I think. So, but I'm not lazy enough to let go things. That's the problem. So there is some kind of ambition, or well, there is the love of music, obviously, and some kind of obstination that if you've actually decided to learn something or to play something, you want to go right to the end with it, you know. So there is no middle way for me. Yeah. But
I find
maybe some questions.
I find that the repetitive aspect of all this is in itself torture. The repetitive, and the great luck of conductors is that they don't have to. I mean, they have to rehearse with an orchestra, but they can, you know, put that in their head, the score. I mean, just as you with the Peri by Schumann or these works. You know, Piotr can actually play from memory anything he wants. You know, he's at the piano and he will play the entire output of Schumann, whether lieder or symphonies or piano music. It's there in his head, so he doesn't have to really repeat it for him to memorize it, which is a great thing. You know, it's instant, almost instant memory. And that's a great thing. But otherwise, the repetitive aspect of performing music, it can be repetitive in the sense to learn the piece, or like this wonderful pianist, Grigory Sokolov, who plays the same program 70 times in a row, without changing a note, you know, just the same. And so I think that is one of the main chores of the musical approach. No?
No,
am I wrong?
No, I agree, and I much envy instrumentalists and singers. No, I'm good, thanks. Because you do not have the shock from utopia to reality that we have, because our instrument is other people, and each person has their own set of ideas and views, and whether I'm wrong or right, or whether they had cold coffee in the morning or slept poorly. And so when I come into rehearsal with my utopia in my mind, you know, the music I envisioned, I'm going to have a very cold shock with reality. And I get about, in the best of cases, I get about 30% of what I had imagined in my inner hearing, you know. And so I envy you very much, because maybe you have to deal with bad acoustics or a piano that isn't working or a bad, unpolite audience, but I think you can deliver more directly what you want and bring it out into the stage. You don't have to convince anyone, you know, to do what you need. It's just you and your fingers and your mind, and it's filtered through your whole body. So I think that's maybe one thing I envy, and I wish I was doing that.
Is there, what about the public, the audience?
Any question of the audience? I'd like to say for me this pandemic was fantastic, because the way of having you here and you as well. Without that, you will be not here, and there will be no concert at all, you know, because you will be somewhere in between Munich and Norwegian. You will be I don't know where, and Martin will have all these things as well to do. Not at least, you know, we have a great moment.
Something else with music, which does not necessarily require the actual realization of the sound. It can be, I mean, one can hear music in one's head, you know, and it could I could very well conceive of spending the rest of my life just listening to music without hearing the actual sound. I mean, I would certainly be deprived of something. Because the actual production of the sound is something which is immensely satisfying. But it is conceivable, you know, that that is not an absolute necessity. Just, you know, as after all, you know, anybody who might have the complete memory of a novel or could you know, let it go through without actually reading it, because at the moment it is completely ingested by one's intellectual ability. Then it is perfectly enjoyable. No, what do you think? What you've? No, sorry.
It depends. God, we talk so much. Maybe everybody's getting bored, I feel. But maybe we somebody has some questions. That would be, the only thing I could add is that. Yes, you can listen to music without sound and hear the music without sound. I think the main purpose of sound is communication. You can't communicate music without sound. You can't communicate music without sound. The main purpose of sound is communication, and the main purpose of repeating a phrase, repeating, with the piano physically, so it gets into my body, so it's part of, not part of me intellectually, it's part of my body, it's part of my whole system. From my experience, this is the absolutely only way to actually share and communicate. So it depends if one wants to share this. If not, of course, it's enough to read a score and enjoy it immensely, you know, as well. Yeah.
Hi. I think we are discussing here some really important problems, but there are many levels and layers. One layer is an individual one. How do we live these pandemics and in an intellectual level, so getting closer to our art and spending time, etc. But there is a very down-to-earth aspect of it. And I regret that Risto from the Gulbenkian service is not here, because he would be symbolizing and speaking for institutions, because we have the classical music business, and as you told, Piotr, it's like a big machine, and this machine has stopped, but all machines have stopped. So we have this classical music business, which must be sustainable, and people going to concerts with a reduced number, and how do institutions invite musicians to play or continue their rehearsals, and how is it sustainable for people that have to buy a ticket, but will be like twice the price or 3 times the price to be able to pay. So there is this down-to-earth aspect of it that I think it's a little bit lacking in this conversation, and I think it's crucial, because the classical music business is also the thing that has to be there for us to make art and think of all of this, because we have all the bills to pay, etc. So how will this be? Thank you.
Well, I'm sure it's going to come out in a bad condition, you know, the music business after this epidemics might be completely ruined. By music business, you're talking mainly about, you know, institutions like concert stages, concert halls, management, recording. Recording can be a little more safe, but all of that, opera, and the rest, it's particularly management, I think, is going to partly disappear. But then, if it might bring about a more sensitive approach, a more artistic approach towards the musical activity, that might lead some wonderful results in the end. But of course, it's very abstract what we're saying, you know, because we would have to give some concrete examples. For instance, Piotr, you've got your main agent in England, big, enormous company. What's going to happen to them directly? You have no idea, I suppose.
Well, they've already reduced, from what I know. Basically, there is less staff. There is, I don't know, they've reduced the agency by half or something like this. But and if this pandemic goes on, there's a possibility that managements will basically collapse. It won't be sustainable anymore, you know. So, but to answer to your question, what can I do about this? I am not an agent, and I will never be an agent. It's a shame we don't have somebody from the business here. It's a very valid discussion, but I don't know what can I say. If they collapse, they collapse. What can I do? What can I do?
Can I add something? I agree with you that it's a shame that Risto is not here, because it would be very interesting to pinpoint, maybe heads against the wall, how an institution like Gulbenkian is going to work around this pandemic.
Martin, just to know that Risto was invited to be here, and at the last minute he said he could not come.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm sure that there's a good reason, not saying there isn't, but it would be interesting indeed, because none of us make the industry work. You know, we're just little bolts and pieces that go with the bigger wheel. But one thing I do think is applicable, and we should never let that go out of sight, which is the arts and the art milieu and the artists and what we do, heritage, is always what remains. You look at the way Italians teach history. They teach the history of their country through the history of the arts. They are very proud of talking about Florence in the Renaissance and Venice in pre-Renaissance, etc. And they always pinpoint the artists, and that's why the Medici were so important, and etc. But when shit hits the fan, we are always the first to be discarded. And you look at an example that's very telling, which is of Haydn. Haydn was a court composer. He was employed by Prince Esterházy, etc. We all know of that. And the prince was very keen on having Haydn there. When the prince died, his younger sister, the new prince, didn't love music so much, so he let Haydn go. You know, he was like, we don't need you anymore. And that's when Haydn enters the industry and needs to go to London and write symphonies and becomes a businessman himself. But what is interesting is that if you go to Esterházy these days, they are very proud to show you, this is the Haydn Saal, where Haydn composed. No one will tell you that Haydn was dismissed from his post, you know, because people didn't need him anymore. But 2 years later, that's all they talk about. So what I know is that maybe we will starve, you know, we will run out of work. We will have to go ask for money on the streets. We will stop being musicians, God forbid. But maybe it will happen. But in 200 years' time, no one will remember who the prime minister was or who the minister of culture was or what bills were passed. It's about the arts and about what we do. And that's the thing that's so infamous about this, because everything is transitory. What we do endures time a little more, but we are always, always left with the short end of the stick. You know, when there's no money, where are we going to cut? It's always going to be in culture. So yeah, it would be interesting to have someone from the culture industry, but also someone from how to manage the country in itself, because what we see is that we keep being forgotten and left out there on the rain. I don't know if this in any way answers your question, because it's a question I also have. I would love to see it answered, and I don't think a specific person can answer, but institutions must be held accountable, because institutions have to think of the ecosystem, the thing I said in the beginning, because there's real life danger in here that a whole generation is going to go AWOL.
I don't think that will be, I think in like always, everything will be reinvented if it's needed, you know, but we will, you know, the art, like Martin says, you know, it will be eternal in a way. And maybe sometimes shaking, it's not bad, because shaking the thing sometimes, you know, what is, you know, too much just go away, and what is essential stays. Don't maybe. You know, that all the industry, all these, you know, everyone that in all industries of art, and I'm talking as well about the cinema and everything, they have to reinvent themselves. Okay, let's see if you are ready to do it. That's all. And if our, but the artist will stay, more or less. I don't think that changed anything. You know, we went through, you know, in the 20th century, there was so many disasters, and everything after that was reinvented, you know, and I don't think we have to be afraid of it. You just have to try to reinvent it ourselves. Gulbenkian, I think the shaking a little bit, Gulbenkian will be very good. Maybe a little more than shaking a little bit, maybe more, okay? Because what they put in art now and what they put it 50 years ago, it's nothing to do. You have to see all the administrators, how much they get of the money they have and everything. Maybe checking a little bit will be not bad. And the other institution is the same. Thank you, everyone.